The morning sun cast long shadows across Naval Base San Diego as Commander Sarah Mitchell stepped out of the black sedan. She adjusted her crisp dress blues, checking her ribbons one final time. Today would change everything, though nobody else knew it yet. The official announcement wouldn't come until tomorrow's ceremony, but she was already the newly appointed Rear Admiral of Naval Special Operations Command. At 38, Sarah had climbed the ranks faster than anyone expected. Her record spoke for itself. 2 tours in Afghanistan, 3 successful counterterrorism operations in the Pacific, and a PhD in strategic military operations from the Naval War College. But today, she wanted to see her new command with fresh eyes, without the formality that would soon surround her position. She had deliberately chosen to visit during a routine training exercise. The best way to understand an organization was to watch it work when it thought nobody important was watching. Sarah walked toward the training compound where SEAL Team 7 was conducting water assault drills. The sound of automatic weapons fire echoed across the bay as she approached the observation deck. Below, 6 Navy SEALs moved through a complex scenario involving hostage rescue on a mock oil platform. Their movements were precise, coordinated, professional. Sarah found herself impressed despite her high standards. "Excuse me, ma'am, this is a restricted area." Sarah turned to find a young petty officer approaching her. His name tape read Jenkins, and he looked nervous about confronting what appeared to be a random officer. "I have clearance," Sarah replied calmly, showing her temporary visitor's badge. "I'm here to observe the exercise." Jenkins studied the badge carefully, then nodded. "Yes, ma'am. The observation deck is right here. Lieutenant Commander Hayes is running the drill today." As if summoned by his name, a tall, broad-shouldered man climbed the stairs to the observation deck. His face was tanned from years of outdoor operations, and his green eyes held the confidence that came with surviving missions most people only saw in movies. This had to be Lieutenant Commander Jake Hayes, the team leader she'd read about in the files. "Another Pentagon observer?" Jake asked Jenkins, not bothering to look directly at Sarah. His attention remained focused on his team below. "Tell them we're not changing our tactics just because some desk jockey thinks they know better." Sarah raised an eyebrow but said nothing. She had learned long ago that the best intelligence came from letting people reveal themselves naturally. "Actually, sir, she's just here to watch," Jenkins said quickly. Jake finally glanced over, taking in Sarah's commander's insignia and perfectly pressed uniform. His expression shifted to barely concealed annoyance. "Great. Another staff officer playing tourist. Try not to get in the way, Commander." "Mitchell," Sarah replied evenly, "and I'll try my best not to interfere with your operations." The sarcasm in Jake's voice was unmistakable as he continued. "Wonderful. Let me guess. You're here to write a report about how we need more diversity training, or better integration with joint forces. Maybe you want to observe our leadership dynamics for some study you're conducting." Sarah almost smiled. If only he knew. Something like that. Below them, the exercise continued. The SEALs had successfully breached the platform and were now clearing rooms methodically. Sarah watched their technique with a trained eye, noting both strengths and areas for improvement. Their communication was excellent, their weapon handling flawless, but their extraction timing could be tighter. "Impressive team," she said genuinely. Jake's chest puffed slightly with pride. "Best in the Navy. These men would follow me into hell if I asked them to. We've been together for 3 years, conducted 17 operations without losing a single teammate. That doesn't happen by accident." "No, it doesn't," Sarah agreed. "That level of trust takes exceptional leadership." For a moment, Jake looked almost pleased by the compliment. Then his guard went back up. "Not that most commanders would understand. Half the officers I deal with have never been in real combat. They make decisions based on PowerPoint presentations and theoretical scenarios." Sarah could feel Jenkins growing more uncomfortable beside them, but she remained calm. "You think combat experience is essential for effective leadership?" "I know it is," Jake replied firmly. "You can't lead warriors if you've never been one yourself. These men need to know that when things go bad, their commander understands what they're facing, because he's been there himself." "Interesting perspective," Era said. "What about officers who've seen combat but in different roles? Intelligence, logistics, Strategic planning? Jake snorted. Paper pushers with combat ribbons are still paper pushers. Real leadership happens in the field, when bullets are flying and lives are on the line. Everything else is just politics and career advancement. The exercise below was winding down. The SEALs had completed their objective and were executing their extraction. Sarah noted that their timing was indeed slower than optimal, nearly 30 seconds longer than the recommended maximum exposure time. Your extraction could be tighter, she observed. Jake's head whipped around, his eyes flashing with anger. Excuse me? The extraction phase. Your team is exposed on the platform for too long after completing the primary objective. In a real scenario, enemy reinforcements could arrive during that window. Listen, Commander. Jake's voice carried a warning edge. I don't know what training exercises you've observed from your air-conditioned office, but this is how real operators work. Maybe stick to whatever it is you actually do instead of trying to critique professionals. Sarah remained completely calm. I'm just making an observation based on tactical analysis. Tactical analysis? Jake repeated mockingly. Let me guess. You've studied our operations from satellite imagery and debriefing reports. Maybe run some computer simulations. That's not the same as being down there with a rifle in your hands, knowing that one mistake gets your teammates killed. Jenkins looked like he wanted to disappear entirely. Several other sailors on the deck had stopped their conversations to listen to the exchange. Word was spreading that their beloved team leader was dressing down some staff officer. You're absolutely right, Sarah said, surprising everyone. There's no substitute for first-hand experience. Jake looked momentarily confused by her agreement, but pressed on. Exactly. So maybe leave the tactical critique to those of us who actually do the fighting. Fair enough, Sarah replied. Though I am curious about your thoughts on integration with other special operations units. Do you work much with Army Rangers or Air Force Special Tactics? When we have to, Jake said dismissively, but there's a reason Navy SEALs have the reputation we do. We don't need hand-holding from other units. When the mission is critical, they call us. And international operations? NATO allies, coalition forces? Jake's expression grew more irritated. Ma'am, with all due respect, what exactly is this for? Are you writing some kind of assessment report? Because I've got actual training to conduct, and men to prepare for real missions. Sarah glanced at her watch. The morning was getting late, and she had other facilities to visit before her schedule caught up with her. You're right. I should let you get back to work. Thank you for the demonstration. Demo? Jake's voice rose slightly. Lady, this wasn't a demonstration. This was professional military training conducted by elite operators. We don't perform for tourists. Several of Jake's team members had finished securing their gear and were climbing up to the observation deck. Sarah could see them taking in the scene, their commander clearly agitated, some unknown staff officer standing calmly nearby. She recognized the protective instincts kicking in as they positioned themselves subtly behind Jake. Commander Mitchell? One of the SEALs, a senior chief with kind eyes, stepped forward. I'm Senior Chief Peterson. Is there anything specific you need to know about our operations? At least someone was maintaining proper military courtesy. No, Senior Chief. I was just observing. Your team performed very well. Asterisk, thank you, ma'am. Peterson replied professionally, though his eyes flicked nervously between Sarah and Jake. Jake wasn't done. Since you seem so interested in offering tactical advice, Commander, maybe you'd like to join us for the next exercise? We could always use another observer, from a safe distance, of course. The challenge in his voice was unmistakable. Sarah could see exactly what he was doing, trying to put her in her place by highlighting the difference between those who fought and those who watched. It was a classic power play, one she'd seen countless times throughout her career. That's generous of you, Lieutenant Commander, but I'm sure your training schedule is carefully planned. I wouldn't want to disrupt it. Oh, it wouldn't be a disruption at all, Jake continued, his voice taking on a mocking tone. We're doing urban combat scenarios this afternoon, very educational for staff officers who want to understand what real military operations look like. Sarah could feel the tension building around them. The other SEALs were watching carefully, Reading the situation, Jenkins looked like he might pass out from stress. Even the seagulls seemed to sense the conflict and had gone quiet. Urban combat, Sarah repeated thoughtfully. That does sound interesting. Jake's smile was predatory now. He clearly thought he had her cornered. Excellent. We start at 1400 hours. I'm sure you'll find it very illuminating. I'm sure I will, Sarah replied calmly. Though I should mention I do have some experience with urban operations. Oh, really? Jake's tone was pure skepticism. And where might that have been? Some joint exercise in North Carolina? A NATO training event in Germany? Sarah paused, considering how much to reveal. She could end this entire confrontation right now with a single sentence. But something held her back. Maybe it was curiosity about how far Jake would push this. Maybe it was a desire to understand the exact culture she was about to command. Or maybe, if she was honest with herself, it was the competitive streak that had driven her to excel in every challenge throughout her career. Here and there, she said simply. Jake laughed, a sound without humor. Here and there. Right. Well, Commander, I look forward to showing you how real operators handle urban environments. Should be quite an education for you. As Sarah prepared to leave, she overheard one of the younger SEALs whisper to another, Man, the LT is really letting her have it. Serves her right for trying to critique our tactics. The irony wasn't lost on her. In less than 24 hours, these same men would be standing at attention as she was officially introduced as their new commanding officer. The thought almost made her smile, but she maintained her professional composure. Thank you for the invitation, Lieutenant Commander Hayes. I'll see you this afternoon. Looking forward to it, Jake replied, his confidence absolute. As Sarah walked back toward the main building, she could hear the SEALs gathering around their team leader, their voices carrying across the water. Who was that? Someone asked. Some staff officer from the Pentagon, probably, Jake replied dismissively. Thought she could come down here and tell us how to do our jobs. She'll get a reality check this afternoon. Sarah continued walking, her mind already shifting to the afternoon's events. She had originally planned to spend the day reviewing files and meeting with senior staff, but this unexpected encounter had changed her priorities. Sometimes the best way to understand an organization was to see how it reacted to unexpected challenges. Her phone buzzed with a message from her aide. Admiral, your 1500 meeting with base commander has been confirmed for tomorrow before the ceremony. All dress blue preparations are complete. Admiral. The rank still felt new, even though the promotion had been in the works for months. Tomorrow everyone would know. But today, she was just Commander Mitchell, a staff officer, who had somehow managed to irritate one of the Navy's most elite team leaders. As she reached her car, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. The afternoon was going to be very interesting indeed. Lieutenant Commander Hayes thought he was about to teach a lesson to some desk-bound bureaucrat. Instead, he was about to learn something himself about making assumptions. She checked her watch again. 6 hours until the urban combat exercise. 6 hours to prepare for what would undoubtedly be a memorable afternoon. Jake Hayes might be an exceptional SEAL, but he was about to discover that exceptional came in many different forms. The sun was climbing higher now, burning off the morning marine layer. It was going to be a beautiful day for a lesson in humility, though not necessarily for the person Jake Hayes expected. Sarah spent her lunch hour in the base library, reviewing urban combat manuals and recent after-action reports from similar training exercises. She wasn't preparing because she needed to. Her experience in Fallujah and Ramadi had taught her everything these training scenarios could offer, but she wanted to understand exactly how SEAL Team 7 approached these situations, what their standard procedures were, and where their potential blind spots might be. At 13:30 hours, she changed into the combat fatigues that her aide had quietly delivered to her temporary quarters. The gear felt familiar in her hands. M4 carbine, tactical vest, communications equipment. She had worn similar equipment in far more dangerous places than a training facility in San Diego. As she walked toward the Urban Warfare Training Center, Sarah reflected on her morning encounter with Jake Hayes. His attitude wasn't uncommon among Special Operations Forces, though it was more extreme than she typically encountered. There was a certain culture in elite units that bordered on arrogance, and sometimes that confidence crossed the line into contempt for anyone they perceived as outsiders. The training facility was impressive, a mock city block complete with multi-story buildings, narrow alleys, and realistic urban obstacles. She could see SEAL Team 7 already assembled near the command post, their gear meticulously checked and ready. Jake stood in the center of the group, briefing his men with the easy authority of someone who had done this hundreds of times before. "Commander Mitchell," Jake called out as she approached, his voice carrying clearly across the training area. "Ready for your educational experience?" The other SEALs turned to look at her, their expressions ranging from curious to skeptical. These were professional warriors, and she could read their assessment of her in their eyes. They saw a staff officer in borrowed gear, someone who was about to be politely but thoroughly shown her place.
"Ready when you are, Lieutenant Commander," Sarah replied calmly. Jake gestured to a young ensign standing nearby. "Ensign Rodriguez here will be your safety officer. He'll keep you out of harm's way during the exercise.
Wouldn't want you getting hurt during your observation." Sarah nodded politely to Rodriguez, who looked embarrassed by his assignment. "Ma'am, I'll stay close and make sure you have a good view of the action while maintaining a safe distance. The scenario is straightforward," Jake continued, clearly enjoying himself. "Terrorist cell has taken hostages in the main building. 3 civilians being held on the second floor, unknown number of hostiles throughout the structure. Standard room clearing procedures, nothing too complicated for observers to follow." He paused, studying Sarah's gear with obvious skepticism. "Though I have to ask, Commander, when was the last time you actually carried a weapon in a tactical situation? We want to make sure you're comfortable with the equipment." "It's been a while," Sarah replied truthfully. Her last combat deployment had ended 8 months ago, though Jake didn't need to know that detail. "Right," Jake said with satisfaction. "Well, don't worry. You'll be safely behind the action where you can take notes for your report." Senior Chief Peterson approached the group, carrying a tablet with the exercise parameters. "LT, we're set for a standard 6-man entry. 2 teams, 3 men each. Alpha Team takes the ground floor and basement. Bravo Team handles 2nd and 3rd floors." "Sounds good, Chief," Jake replied. Then, with a glance at Sarah, he added, "Though maybe we should modify our approach for our guest. Might be good to demonstrate some basic room clearing techniques, educational value and all that." Sarah could see exactly what he was doing. Instead of running their normal, efficient exercise, he wanted to slow things down and over-explain everything, treating her like a first-year midshipman who needed basic concepts spelled out. "That won't be necessary," she said politely. "I'd prefer to see your standard procedures." "Standard procedures," Jake repeated, his tone suggesting that standard procedures might be too advanced for a staff officer to comprehend. "Well, if you're sure you can keep up with the tactical complexity." The exercise began with Jake's team moving toward the target building in perfect formation. Their approach was textbook: proper spacing, good communication, weapons positioned for immediate response to threats. Sarah watched from her designated position with Ensign Rodriguez, noting their technique with a professional eye. Alpha Team reached the ground floor entry point and began their breach sequence. The door came down with practiced efficiency, and the 3 SEALs flowed into the building like water finding the easiest path. Their movement was smooth, coordinated, exactly what Sarah expected from elite operators. But something was bothering her about their approach. The building layout included a service corridor that connected the basement to the 2nd floor, a detail she had noticed on the facility maps during her earlier research. Standard room clearing doctrine would secure that corridor early to prevent enemy movement between floors, but Jake's team seemed to be ignoring it. "Ensign Rodriguez," she said quietly, "does your team usually secure the service corridor during these exercises?" Rodriguez looked confused. "Service corridor, ma'am. The maintenance access that runs from the basement to the 2nd floor. It's marked on the facility blueprint." The young officer checked his tablet, scrolling through the building schematics. "Oh, that corridor. I think it's usually considered out of bounds for the exercise. The role players don't use it." Sarah nodded but continued watching. In a real situation, any corridor would be a potential threat route. Either Jake didn't know about it, or he was so confident in his standard procedures that he wasn't adapting to the specific building layout. The radio crackled as Alpha Team reported their progress. Ground floor clear, moving to basement level. Bravo Team was advancing on the 2nd floor, where the hostages were supposedly being held. Sarah could hear their careful progress through the communication system. Professional call-outs, proper clearing procedures, everything by the book. Impressive, isn't it? Jake's voice came from behind her. He had positioned himself near the command post where he could monitor the exercise and keep an eye on his guest. This is what real tactical proficiency looks like, Commander. Very professional, Sarah agreed sincerely. Your team works well together. 3 years of constant training and deployment rotations, Jake said proudly. You can't develop this kind of unit cohesion sitting behind a desk. The radio reported that Bravo team had reached the hostage room. 2 tangos down, hostages secured, came the call. The exercise was proceeding exactly according to plan. Too exactly, Sarah realized. Real combat was never this smooth, this predictable. She had been in enough actual urban fights to know that the enemy rarely cooperated with your tactical plan. The best training scenarios included unexpected complications, adaptive threats, variables that forced operators to think on their feet. Do your role players ever use unconventional tactics? She asked Rodriguez quietly. Ma'am? The opposing force. Do they ever try unexpected approaches? Alternative routes? Changing the situation mid-exercise? Rodriguez looked puzzled. They follow the scenario brief, ma'am. Standard terrorist response patterns. Sarah nodded but felt a growing concern. Excellent technical execution was important, but adaptability under pressure was what separated good units from great ones. SEAL Team 7 was clearly good, but she was beginning to wonder if their training was challenging them enough. Hostages recovered. Beginning extraction. Came the radio call. Perfect timing, Jake announced with satisfaction. Exercise complete. In 14 minutes, 37 seconds. Well within acceptable parameters. As the team began their withdrawal, Sarah noticed something that made her pause. One of the role players, someone who should have been playing a neutralized terrorist, was moving through the service corridor she had noticed earlier. It appeared the exercise controllers were about to spring a surprise complication. Rodriguez, she said urgently, is that movement in the service corridor part of the planned scenario? The ensign checked his tablet frantically. I don't think so, ma'am. That might be an evaluator checking on something. But Sarah could see the figure clearly now through the building's windows. It was definitely a role player, wearing the enemy uniform and carrying a training weapon. Someone was about to surprise Jake's team during their extraction. The ambush came exactly as Sarah expected. As Bravo team escorted the simulated hostages down the main stairway, the role player burst from the service corridor access point on the second-floor landing. In a real situation, it would have been a devastating surprise attack. Contact! Contact! The radio exploded with urgent calls as the SEALs reacted to the unexpected threat. Sarah watched the response with professional interest. The team's reaction was fast and aggressive, exactly what their training had drilled into them. They immediately moved to suppress the threat and protect the hostages. Their technical skills were flawless, but their positioning was wrong for the confined space. 2 operators were trying to engage the same target from angles that put them at risk of crossfire. The hostages were caught in the middle of the response, instead of being moved to safety first. It was exactly the kind of tactical complication that exposed the difference between training and combat experience. Damn it, Jake's voice cut through the radio chatter. Where the hell did he come from? Sarah found herself analyzing the situation with the same clarity she had used in actual combat. The solution was straightforward. One operator needed to reposition to create a safe engagement angle, while another moved the hostages to the stairway below the threat level. But Jake's team was stuck in their initial reaction, trying to fight their way through the problem instead of thinking through it. Before she really thought about what she was doing, Sarah was moving toward the building. Ma'am, you need to stay in the observation area. Rodriguez called after her, but she was already jogging toward the side entrance. Sarah slipped into the building through the ground floor access point that Alpha Team had cleared earlier. She could hear the ongoing firefight on the floor above, training rounds being exchanged, urgent radio calls, the sound of men under pressure trying to regain control of a deteriorating situation. The service corridor access was exactly where the building plans had indicated. Sarah moved quickly but carefully up the maintenance stairs, her weapon ready. This was just training, but her muscle memory from real combat zones had kicked in automatically. She emerged from the service corridor behind the role player who was keeping Jake's team pinned down. In a real situation, she would have taken the shot immediately. In this training scenario, she simply pressed her weapon's muzzle against the role player's back and said clearly, "Bang, you're dead."
The role player raised his hands in acknowledgement, and the engagement simulation ended. The sudden silence that followed was almost deafening. Sarah could hear boots on the stairs as Jake and his team rushed to understand what had happened. How the hell? Jake's voice trailed off as he saw Sarah standing where the threat had been, her weapon still in the ready position. Senior Chief Peterson was the first to speak. "Ma'am, that was excellent tactical movement. How did you know about that corridor?" Sarah lowered her weapon and safed it properly. Building schematics. The layout showed a maintenance access that wasn't being monitored. Jake stared at her with an expression that mixed confusion, embarrassment, and dawning realization. "You studied the building plans?" "Standard preparation," Sarah replied simply. "Know your terrain, identify all possible routes and approaches. Basic tactical planning." The other SEALs were gathering around now, their earlier skepticism replaced by professional curiosity. They had just watched someone they had dismissed as a paper-pushing staff officer execute a textbook flanking maneuver under pressure. "Commander," Senior Chief Peterson said carefully, "if you don't mind me asking, where exactly did you serve?" Sarah considered her answer. The truth was going to come out tomorrow anyway, but revealing it now would change the entire dynamic of what had become an important learning opportunity. "Iraq and Afghanistan," she said simply. "A few tours." Jake's expression was shifting rapidly as he processed this information. "What unit?" "Various assignments," Sarah replied diplomatically. She could see him thinking, trying to reconcile his assumptions with what he had just witnessed. The staff officers didn't move through buildings like that. Staff officers didn't read terrain like that. And they definitely didn't outflank Navy SEALs during tactical exercises. "Ma'am?" One of the younger SEALs spoke up. "That was some serious tactical thinking. Using the service corridor was brilliant. It was obvious once you looked at the building layout," Sarah replied. "The important thing is adapting your plan when the situation changes. Your technical skills are excellent, but real combat is always messier than training scenarios." Jake was quiet now, studying her with new attention. "You said it had been a while since you carried a weapon in a tactical situation." 8 months, Sarah said truthfully. "My last deployment ended in May." "Deployment," Jake repeated slowly. "Not training exercise. Not joint operation. Deployment." Sarah nodded. "Afghanistan. Counterterrorism operations in the Kunar province." The silence that followed was heavy with realization. These men knew enough about military operations to understand exactly what counterterrorism operations in the Kunar province meant. It wasn't staff work. It wasn't observation duty. It was hard combat against sophisticated enemy forces in some of the most dangerous terrain in the world. Senior Chief Peterson cleared his throat. "Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, what was your role in those operations?" Sarah glanced at her watch. The afternoon was getting late, and she still had other obligations. But this conversation had become important in ways she hadn't anticipated. "Joint Task Force operations," she said carefully, "working with various special operations units on high-value target missions." Jake's face had gone pale. Joint Task Force operations. "Against HVTs," he paused, his military experience filling in the implications. "Ma'am, that's not staff officer work." "No," Sarah agreed quietly, "it's not." The training facility had grown quiet, except for the distant sound of waves hitting the shore. Jake's team stood in a loose circle around Sarah, their earlier confidence replaced by something that looked suspiciously like respect, mixed with embarrassment. "Commander Mitchell," Jake began, his voice noticeably different from the mocking tone he had used that morning. "I think I owe you an apology." Sarah held up a hand. "No need for apologies, Lieutenant Commander. You were protecting your team and your standards. That's exactly what a good leader should do. But I was wrong about—" Jake gestured helplessly, struggling to find the right words. "I made assumptions." "We all make assumptions," Sarah replied calmly. "The important thing is what we do when we get new information." Senior Chief Peterson stepped forward. "Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, what kind of joint task force operations were you running in Afghanistan?" Sarah considered her answer carefully. Even 8 months after her last mission, operational security remained important. But these men deserved to understand who they had been dealing with.
Combined special operations targeting high-value terrorist leaders. Coordination between Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, Air Force Special Tactics, and intelligence assets. Planning and executing precision raids in denied territory. The implications of her words settled over the group like a heavy blanket. Jake's face had gone from pale to slightly green. Planning and executing precision raids wasn't something staff officers did. It was what commanders did, commanders of elite special operations units. How many operations? Jake asked quietly. 17 successful raids over 11 months, Sarah replied. No friendly casualties, 14 high-value targets eliminated or captured. One of the younger SEALs whistled softly. Ma'am, that's an incredible record. Sarah shrugged. Good planning, excellent operators, and careful execution. The success belongs to the men and women who carried out the missions. Jake was staring at her with growing horror as the full scope of his mistake became clear. Commander, when you said my team's extraction timing could be tighter, I was offering a tactical observation based on operational experience. Sarah finished. 30 seconds of unnecessary exposure on target can be the difference between a successful mission and a casualty report. Jesus, Jake muttered, running his hands through his hair. I told you to stick to what you actually do instead of critiquing professionals. You were defending your team, Sarah said again. That shows good leadership instincts, even if your intelligence assessment was flawed. Senior Chief Peterson was studying Sarah with new eyes. Ma'am, 17 successful raids. What was your role in the command structure? Sarah glanced at her watch again. Her aide would be looking for her soon, and there were still preparations to complete before tomorrow's ceremony. But this conversation had become too important to cut short. Task Force Commander, she said simply. The words hung in the air like a bomb that hadn't exploded yet. Task Force Commander meant she hadn't just participated in those 17 raids. She had planned them, led them, been responsible for every decision that meant the difference between success and failure, life and death. Jake sat down heavily on a nearby equipment crate. Task Force Commander, 17 successful raids. He looked up at her with something approaching awe. Ma'am, who the hell are you? Before Sarah could answer, her phone buzzed with an urgent message. Her aide's name appeared on the screen, followed by, Admiral, the base commander needs to meet with you immediately. There's been a schedule change for tomorrow's ceremony. Sarah read the message and sighed. The complications of her new position were already beginning to intrude on what had become an unexpectedly valuable afternoon. I need to go, she said to the group. Thank you for allowing me to observe your training. You have an excellent team, Lieutenant Commander Hayes. Wait, Jake stood up quickly. Commander, I need to ask, why didn't you tell me who you were this morning? Sarah considered the question seriously. What would you have learned about your team and your training if I had identified myself immediately? What would I have learned about the unit I'm about to? She caught herself just before revealing too much. Tomorrow's announcement would explain everything, but today she was still just Commander Mitchell. The unit you're about to what? Senior Chief Peterson asked. Sarah's phone buzzed again, more urgently. I really do need to go. But Lieutenant Commander Hayes, I want you to think about something. Your team's technical skills are outstanding, but your training scenarios may not be challenging you enough. Real combat includes more variables, more unknowns. Consider incorporating more adaptive elements into your exercises. Jake nodded slowly. Yes, ma'am. I'll definitely consider that. As Sarah turned to leave, one of the younger SEALs called out, Ma'am, will we see you again? Sarah paused, allowing herself a small smile. I expect so. The walk back to the main building gave Sarah time to process what had just happened. Her intention had been to observe quietly and get an unfiltered look at the unit she would soon command. Instead, she had ended up directly involved in their training, revealed more about her background than she had planned, and fundamentally changed how Jake Hayes viewed both his own assumptions and his training methods. The base commander's office was in the main administration building, an imposing structure that reflected the Navy's commitment to both tradition and modern efficiency. Captain Robert Chen was waiting for her when she arrived, his expression serious. Admiral Mitchell, he said, rising from his desk. Thank you for coming so quickly. The use of her proper rank was jarring after spending the day as simply Commander Mitchell. Tomorrow everyone would know her real position.
but today had been her last chance to move through the Navy as just another officer. "What's the situation, Captain?" Sarah asked, settling into the chair across from his desk. "We've had a development that affects tomorrow's ceremony," Chen explained. "The Secretary of the Navy wants to accelerate the transition timeline. Instead of the planned 2-week overlap with Admiral Harrison, he wants you to assume full command immediately following tomorrow's ceremony." Sarah frowned. "That's a significant change. What's driving the urgency?" Chen handed her a classified briefing folder. "Intelligence reports suggest increased terrorist activity in the Pacific. PACOM wants our special operations assets at full readiness immediately. They need a commander who can hit the ground running." Sarah opened the folder and scanned the intelligence summaries. The situation was indeed serious. Coordinated terrorist cell activity across 3 different countries, potential threats to American assets in the region, and indications that a major operation was being planned. "How much does Admiral Harrison know about this?" she asked. "He's been briefed, and he agrees with the accelerated timeline," Chen replied. He said, and I quote, "If they want someone who can handle a crisis, they picked the right person." Sarah felt the familiar weight of command responsibilities settling on her shoulders. Tomorrow she would officially become responsible for thousands of elite operators, millions of dollars in specialized equipment, and critical missions that could affect national security. "Has the team been notified about the change?" she asked. "That's where we have a small problem," Chen said carefully. "The notification was scheduled to go out this evening, but there's been some informal communication about tomorrow's ceremony." "What kind of informal communication?" Chen looked uncomfortable. "Apparently, some members of SEAL Team 7 have been discussing a female staff officer who visited their training today. The word impressive has been used, along with some speculation about who she might be." Sarah almost laughed. Jake's team was apparently better at intelligence gathering than she had given them credit for. "How much do they know?" "Nothing official," Chen assured her. "But Senior Chief Peterson has been asking questions about new command assignments, and Lieutenant Commander Hayes has been unusually quiet since this afternoon's training exercise." "Unusually quiet?" "According to his team members, he's been reviewing after-action reports and studying building schematics for training facilities. Apparently, he's concerned that their scenarios aren't challenging enough." Sarah smiled. Jake was learning exactly the lesson she had hoped to teach, even if the method had been more direct than she had originally planned. "Captain, I want to make sure tomorrow's ceremony achieves its intended purpose," she said. "These men and women need to have confidence in their new commander. They need to know that I understand their capabilities and their challenges." "From what I've heard about today's events," Chen replied, "I don't think confidence will be an issue." Sarah's aide appeared in the doorway, carrying a garment bag and looking slightly frazzled. "Admiral, your dress blues are ready, and I have the final ceremony schedule. Also, Lieutenant Commander Hayes has requested permission to speak with you before tomorrow's ceremony." "Hayes wants to meet with me?" Sarah asked. "What about?" "He didn't specify, ma'am, but he seemed concerned about something." Sarah exchanged glances with Captain Chen, who shrugged. "Probably wants to apologize formally for his behavior today. He's a good officer, just protective of his team." "Schedule the meeting for 0800 tomorrow," Sarah decided, 30 minutes before the ceremony begins. As her aide made notes, Sarah's mind was already shifting into command mode. Tomorrow would bring new responsibilities, new challenges, and the beginning of what she hoped would be a successful tenure as commander of Naval Special Operations Command. But first, she had to get through one more conversation with Lieutenant Commander Jake Hayes, a conversation that promised to be just as interesting as their first encounter. "Captain Chen," she said, "I want a full briefing on current operations and readiness status first thing tomorrow morning, and I want to review the personnel files for all team leaders." "Already prepared, Admiral," Chen replied, "though you might want to pay particular attention to Lieutenant Commander Hayes's file. His record is quite impressive despite his strong personality." Sarah nodded. She had already begun forming her own assessment of Jake Hayes. He was clearly an excellent operator and a devoted team leader. His judgment had been flawed today, but his instincts to protect his team and maintain standards were exactly what she wanted in her commanders. The challenge would be channeling that protective instinct in more productive directions while maintaining the confidence and morale that made his team so effective.
As Sarah left the base commander's office, she caught sight of herself in the reflection of a window. Tomorrow, she would wear the stars of a rear admiral and assume command of one of the Navy's most elite organizations. Tonight, she was still just Commander Mitchell, walking across a naval base in borrowed combat fatigues, carrying the memory of an afternoon that had taught her as much about herself as it had about her new command. The sun was setting over San Diego Bay, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. It had been a long day, full of unexpected challenges and revelations. Tomorrow promised to be even more interesting. Sarah's phone buzzed with one final message of the day. This one from Admiral Harrison, her predecessor. Heard you made quite an impression today. These sailors are lucky to have you. Fair winds and following seas. She smiled and typed back. Thank you, sir. I'll take good care of them. As she walked toward her quarters, Sarah found herself looking forward to tomorrow's ceremony with anticipation rather than anxiety. Jake Hayes and his team had taught her something important today. These men and women deserved a commander who understood not just the theory of special operations, but the reality of what they faced every time they accepted a mission. Tomorrow, she would officially become their admiral. But today, she had become something more important. She had become their peer. The morning of the ceremony dawned clear and bright over Naval Base San Diego. Sarah stood at the window of her temporary quarters, watching the early morning preparations taking place on the parade ground below. Sailors in dress blues were setting up chairs and adjusting sound equipment, their movements precise and efficient. In 3 hours, she would officially become Rear Admiral Sarah Mitchell, commander of Naval Special Operations Command. The weight of that responsibility had settled on her shoulders during the night, bringing with it both excitement and the sobering awareness of what lay ahead. Her aide knocked softly on the door. Admiral, Lieutenant Commander Hayes is here for his 0800 appointment. Sarah checked her appearance in the mirror one final time. She was wearing her service khakis, with commander's insignia that would be replaced with Admiral's stars in just a few hours. Send him in. Jake Hayes entered the room with the bearing of a man who had spent the night wrestling with uncomfortable realizations. His uniform was immaculate, his posture perfect, but Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders and the uncertainty in his eyes. Lieutenant Commander Hayes reporting as requested, ma'am, he said formally. At ease, Jake, Sarah replied, gesturing to the chairs arranged near the window. Thank you for coming. I understand you wanted to speak with me before the ceremony. Jake sat down carefully, clearly struggling with how to begin. Ma'am, I spent most of last night researching Joint Task Force operations in Afghanistan, specifically, operations targeting high-value terrorist leaders in the Kunar province. Sarah waited quietly, allowing him to work through whatever he needed to say. There's only one American unit that conducted 17 successful HVT raids in that region. During the time frame you mentioned, Jake continued. Joint Task Force Sentinel, under the command of Navy Commander Sarah Mitchell. The words hung between them like a challenge. Sarah met his gaze steadily. Go on. Task Force Sentinel was responsible for eliminating or capturing some of the most dangerous terrorist leaders in Afghanistan, Jake said, his voice gaining strength as he spoke, including the operation that took down Ahmad Shah Massoud, the al-Qaeda cell leader who had been evading capture for 3 years. Sarah nodded slowly. That was a particularly challenging operation. Good intelligence, careful planning, and excellent execution by all units involved. Jake leaned forward, his expression intense. Ma'am, Ahmad Shah Massoud was considered uncapturable. He had survived 6 previous attempts by Special Operations Forces. The mission to finally get him required coordinating Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, Air Force Special Tactics, and Delta Force operators in the most hostile territory in Afghanistan. It was a complex operation, Sarah agreed calmly. Complex? Jake repeated, shaking his head. Ma'am, that operation is studied at the Naval War College as a masterpiece of special operations planning and execution. The after-action report is classified, but the tactical innovation and leadership required to pull it off, he trailed off, struggling to find the right words. Jake, Sarah said gently, what are you trying to ask me? Ma'am, I need to know, who are you really? Because yesterday I treated a decorated Special Operations Commander like she was some desk jockey who didn't understand combat. And today, he gestured helplessly, today you're going to be introduced as our new commanding officer, aren't you? Sarah stood and walked to the window, looking out at the ceremony preparations below. What makes you think that? The timing, the security arrangements, the fact that Admiral Harrison is retiring today and they're holding a change of command ceremony? Jake's voice was quiet but certain. Plus, Senior Chief Peterson did some checking last night. There's only one Navy Commander, Sarah Mitchell, with the qualifications to command a special operations unit. Sarah turned back to face him. And what did your research tell you about that Commander Mitchell? Jake stood as well, his posture unconsciously shifting to attention. That she's one of the most decorated special operations officers in the Navy. That she has a PhD in strategic military operations from the Naval War College. That she's completed multiple combat tours and has never lost a service member under her command. That she's being fast-tracked for flag rank because she's exactly the kind of leader special operations forces need. And how do you feel about that? Sarah asked. Jake was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing his words carefully. Ma'am, I feel like the biggest idiot in the entire United States Navy. Sarah almost smiled at his honest assessment. Why? Because I spent yesterday morning lecturing you about combat experience and real leadership, Jake said, his face flushed with embarrassment. I told you that real leaders don't come from behind desks, they come from the field. I said that officers who haven't been in combat can't understand what warriors face. And you were wrong about my background, Sarah said. But were you wrong about the principle? Jake looked confused by the question. Ma'am? Do you still believe that effective military leadership requires understanding what your people face? Do you still think commanders should have real experience with the challenges their units encounter? Yes, ma'am, I do, Jake replied without hesitation. Then you weren't wrong about the principle, Sarah said firmly. You were wrong about me specifically, but your instinct to demand experienced leadership was correct. These men and women deserve commanders who understand what they're being asked to do. Jake stared at her with growing respect. Ma'am, most officers would be furious about how I treated you yesterday. Most officers haven't spent months in combat zones watching good people die because of poor leadership decisions, Sarah replied. Your protective instinct toward your team is exactly what I want in my commanders. But I was disrespectful, insubordinate. Sarah held up a hand. You were skeptical of someone you perceived as unqualified. In a social situation, that might be rude. In a military context where lives depend on competent leadership, that's professional responsibility. Jake seemed to be processing this perspective with some difficulty. So you're not angry about yesterday? Angry? Sarah considered the question seriously. No, Jake, I'm not angry. I'm impressed. Impressed? Sarah moved back to her chair and gestured for Jake to sit as well. You stood up for your team's standards even when it might have gotten you in trouble. You questioned authority when you thought that authority might be unqualified. Those are exactly the leadership qualities I need in my subordinate commanders. Jake sat down slowly, clearly struggling to reconcile this response with his expectations. Most senior officers don't appreciate being questioned. Most senior officers haven't spent their careers in special operations, Sarah replied. In our business, questioning authority can be the difference between mission success and mission failure. I want commanders who think independently and speak honestly. Even when they're wrong? Especially when they're wrong, Sarah said firmly. Perfect subordinates who never question orders are dangerous in complex situations. I need commanders who will tell me when they think I'm making a mistake. Jake nodded slowly, beginning to understand her perspective. Ma'am, can I ask you something?
Of course. Yesterday, when you joined the urban combat exercise, why didn't you just tell me who you were?
You could have ended the whole confrontation immediately. Sarah smiled slightly. What would that have taught me about your leadership style? What would it have taught you about adapting to unexpected situations? You used it as a training opportunity, Jake realized. The best learning happens when people don't know they're being tested, Sarah confirmed. If I had identified myself immediately, you would have changed your behavior. I wouldn't have learned how you really operate. and you wouldn't have learned that your tactical assumptions needed adjustment. Jake shook his head in amazement. You let me embarrass myself in front of my team to teach us both a lesson. You didn't embarrass yourself, Sarah corrected. You defended your team and maintained your standards. The fact that your initial assessment of me was wrong doesn't invalidate your leadership instincts. But my team saw me being, Jake struggled for the right word. They saw you being protective of them and skeptical of outsiders, Sarah finished. Those are good qualities in a team leader. They also saw you adapt when you got new information, which is an even better quality. Jake was quiet for several minutes, clearly working through the implications of everything they had discussed. Finally, he looked up at her with an expression of renewed respect. Ma'am, what you did yesterday, using our training exercise to assess both our capabilities and our limitations, that was masterful leadership. It was improvisation, Sarah replied honestly. I had planned to observe quietly, but circumstances changed. Good leaders adapt to unexpected situations. Like when you used the service corridor to flank the role player, Jake said. You didn't just identify our tactical weakness, you demonstrated the solution. Your team's technical skills are excellent, Sarah said. But real combat includes more variables than your training scenarios were providing. You needed to see that, and you needed to experience it. Jake nodded thoughtfully. I've already scheduled a meeting with our training coordinators to review our exercise parameters. We're going to incorporate more adaptive elements, more unknowns. Good, Sarah approved. But don't lose sight of the fundamentals. Your team's technical proficiency is outstanding. Build on that foundation. Yes, ma'am. Jake paused, then continued with obvious sincerity. Admiral, I want you to know that my team and I are honored to serve under your command. Your reputation precedes you, and after yesterday, well, we know we're in good hands. Thank you, Jake. But remember, I'm not here to command you. I'm here to lead you. There's a difference. Ma'am, command is about giving orders, Sarah explained. Leadership is about creating the conditions where good people can do their best work. I want to lead this organization, not just command it. Jake's expression showed that he understood the distinction. What do you need from us, Admiral? Honest communication, professional excellence, and continued dedication to the mission, Sarah replied without hesitation. Keep protecting your team. Keep maintaining your standards, and keep questioning authority when you think it's necessary. Even your authority? Especially my authority, Sarah said with a slight smile. I'm going to be making decisions that affect the lives of thousands of sailors and the success of critical missions. I need commanders who will tell me when they think I'm wrong. Jake stood up, his bearing noticeably more confident than when he had entered the room. Admiral, you have that from me and my team. Absolutely. Sarah stood as well and extended her hand. Then I think we're going to work very well together, Lieutenant Commander. Jake shook her hand firmly. Yes, ma'am. I believe we are. As Jake reached the door, he turned back one more time. Admiral, there's something else my team wanted me to tell you. What's that? After yesterday's exercise, they've been talking about their new commander. The word they keep using is badass. Sarah laughed. The first completely relaxed moment she had experienced since arriving at the base. Well, that's better than paper pusher, I suppose. Yes, ma'am. Much better. After Jake left, Sarah returned to the window and watched the final preparations for the ceremony taking place below. In 1 hour, she would officially assume command of Naval Special Operations Command. The conversation with Jake had confirmed her initial assessment. These were good people doing important work, and they deserved leadership that understood and appreciated their capabilities. Her aide appeared in the doorway again. Admiral, it's time to change into your dress blues. The ceremony begins in 1 hour. Sarah nodded and moved toward the garment bag containing her formal uniform. In a few minutes, she would put on the stars of a rear admiral for the first time. The weight of that responsibility was significant, but the conversation with Jake had reinforced her confidence that she was ready for the challenge. As she began changing into her dress blues, Sarah reflected on the events of the past 24 hours. She had come to Naval Base San Diego planning to observe quietly and assess her new command from a distance. Instead, she had ended up directly engaged with the people she would be leading, learning about them while teaching them about herself. It wasn't the approach she had planned, but it had worked better than anything she could have designed deliberately. Sometimes the best leadership happened when you stopped trying to lead and simply started serving alongside the people you were responsible for. The ceremony would be formal and traditional, full of ritual and protocol that honored the Navy's long history. But the real change of command had already taken place yesterday afternoon, in a training facility where a lieutenant commander had learned to question his assumptions, and a future admiral had learned that her new command was filled with exactly the kind of people she wanted to lead. Sarah pinned on her Admiral's stars and checked her appearance one final time. Through the window, she could see SEAL Team 7 taking their places in the formation of honor guards for the ceremony. Jake Hayes stood at their head, his bearing proud and professional. In a few minutes, she would officially become their admiral, but more importantly, she had already become their leader. The difference, as she had told Jake, was everything.